Hi, thanks for tuning in. We've got a little bit of a cloudy morning today. It is the middle of winter here, but it's still around about 18 degrees. And we've been watching the whales popping up out to sea. It's really cool. But today I've got a lovely Isabella from our customer service team with me. I've got to do some beekeeping. I really need to get into this brood nest and have a look at them. So they look a little bit weak, so I thought we'd take the camera along and answer any questions at the same time. So if you've got any questions, please put them in the comments. You can see here the flow frames are pretty much blank. There's hardly any bees up here, and just want to check the brood box to make sure that these guys have a good enough population to warrant there being a super on here. And we'll just look in the back. So Isabella's sort of a beginner beekeeper. She's done a couple of sessions. So we'll get her into the brood nest. So you can see the population's fairly low up here.
How long has the super been on?
It's been on for a season.
Yeah.
So you can see it's actually been filled. The side frames are still new, so this middle's been filled and harvested. So yeah, you can see there's hardly any bees, so we'll jump into the brood nest. But are you okay to jump in there, Bella?
Yeah.
All right. If you've got any questions, please type them into the comments. So, get your hive tool. The way that I do it, there's lots of different ways, but the way I do it is to put this section in, the chisel section, and down this way between the boxes, so that you've got something to lever against, and then you pull up with your hive tool to try and get the box up. And you've got to,
like the plastic on the bottom, or
doesn't matter. We've got a lift point here, so you lift while you're levering. You can hear it cracking. It's great. So we've cracked it. Feels pretty light. So we might put it down here and jump into the brood nest. Of course, I forgot to put my hood on. If you're new to beekeeping, you really need to wear your protective clothing. So we can see these bees straight away. You can see there's not much of a population here. Normally I'd want to see lots of bees in here, so we might have to see what's going on. So Bella, do you want to get the queen excluder off, and we'll have a quick look for the queen underneath, because she can always be underneath crawling on the queen excluder. But I think because the population in this hive is so low, we do want to make sure the queen is there and is laying.
Peter, questions just come in wondering, do you pre-wax the super?
No, I don't, but you definitely can. So one way of getting the bees up into the flow frames is, if you've just got your brood box here, I can do it on the brood box, is to scrape this wax off, or this wax, or wax on the wall or something like that, just scrape it off. And then you can take your empty flow frame, you pull it out obviously, and just jam it into the side of the comb. So you jam it into here without pulling the flow frame out. You just jam it in there, and the bees go up and say, hey, that wax is not meant to be there, and then they clean it all out, and then that stimulates them to get up and actually start using the space. So that can be a quicker way of doing it. You don't have to pre-wax your frames. The bees will totally do it for you, as long as the population is good enough for them to spare the workers to do that. So Bella, do you want to get your J hook and put it down in this gap here, and then lever back towards me, just to start loosening that frame up, and then really slowly pull it out. So you can sort of see, looking down the frames, that the nest is here, and there's more bees actually coming out. It may just be that they're cold, that they're sort of hunkering down a little bit. You can see lots of bees coming in. The foragers are coming back with lots of pollen on their legs. That's a great sign out the front here.
Oh, these gloves are so tricky.
It is tricky without gloves.
Got tiny hands.
Doing great. You can rest this on that edge as well if you want to.
Like that.
Yep.
Pretty packed on this frame.
And try and lever it away. There we go. Give it a little wiggle if you want to. Great job. So I can see lots of pollen on here. Excuse me. What are you seeing on that side, Bella?
It looks like a bunch of nectar and quite a bit of pollen as well.
Yeah, lots of honey up the top here, lots of new nectar, and lots of pollen. Excuse me. If you've got any questions, please type them in the comments and we'll try and answer them. So if you want to flip that frame around. Yeah, we can see lots of nectar on this side. Just going to touch the bees to get them out of the way so we can see what's beneath them. You can see quite a good population of bees too on this outside frame. So that's good. So I guess from the nectar we know that it's coming in, so they've got food, and so they should be boosting their population. So if you're done looking at that frame, you can put it down and lean it up against the hive if you like. Maybe just like that on its end. Excuse me.
That smoker getting you, Pete.
Must be.
I'm trying to move it, but I can't.
I'm sorry to everyone, that coughing must be quite loud in the microphone. So if you get this little extended portion and just lever.
Does it matter having this wax on the top here? Like, do you clean it off or does it not matter?
If it gets too much, I'll clean it off, but
Yeah.
the bees will just keep building it again. They basically will attach to the queen excluder like that. So it can be, if you've got a lot of hives, it can be a bit of a losing battle. But if you've just got a couple and you don't mind doing it, then it's probably a good idea. Sometimes you can squash bees when you do put them back together, that
Yeah.
and then they're super. Also, if you need wax, if you like to process your wax and turn it into things like candles and beeswax wraps, it can be a good little source of it.
Oh, nice.
You can also get the propolis here,
Yeah.
and people say it's really good for you.
What does it taste like?
Sometimes it can be really sharp. It's tree resin, so it depends what the bees have collected it from, what tree the bees have collected it from. But lots of beekeepers chew it and swear by it. So what are you seeing there?
A lot of worker bees, and a bit more honey. It's pretty packed on the frame.
Are you seeing bees that side?
Yeah.
Sorry, I mean, are you seeing
Oh.
brood that side?
No.
I meant to
just
say.
like honey. Oh, there's some maybe under the bottom, it looks like.
So you can move them out of the way by blowing if you want to. Make sure you've got your hood on when you blow on the bees.
Yeah, it looks like
You can touch
there's a
them.
little bit of...
Yeah, I can see that big patch of capped brood. And then we're looking at the pattern. It's got a nice pattern. I think all these empty cells are probably where the brood's just emerged.
Oh, I can see little grubs in there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's really great. So sometimes the queen will come straight back and lay right in them, which is a really good sign for our population boost. If you've got any comments or questions, please type them in and we'll try and answer them. But I can see lots of brood and lots of pollen on this side, which is all really great signs. Usually there's some honey up here, a big patch of brood in the middle, and then there's a little interface of pollen in between the brood and the honey. So that's like a really kind of typical scenario in your brood nest, and it's lots of different colours, so it means the bees have got a varied diet of pollen, which is really great. Did you want to have another look at a look at the other side?
Do the bees lay more workers in the winter? Do they lay any drones?
Not generally. It's a really good question. The queen won't generally lay drones in the winter time because the drones are fairly resource heavy. As far as we know, they don't do any work for the hive. They don't defend the hive. They're quite big and heavy, and they eat a lot of honey. And as far as we know, that they're only there to try and spread the genetics of the colony by mating with a new queen from other colonies. So in wintertime, when resources are generally scarce, the queen won't lay any drones, and the workers will actually kick the drones out of the hive so that they can get through the winter without them. Are there any questions, Trace?
Yeah, Pete. Look, and it's a question that comes quite a lot. It's all about why do we use foundationless frames, and not put foundation into our brood frames. And then Thomas is also on that question, is asking, do we like pre-wax the top of those to start the bees building on the brood frames, or how do we get them to start those brood frames if we're not using foundation?
Great question. I think to be honest, it's we're not able to ship foundation, first of all, and also it's a lot easier if you're a beginner beekeeper to not have to use foundation actually, because all you do is put your blank frames in the box. And I'm just going to ruin some comb here to show this little starter strip, which is just a small piece of timber, not very thick. If I turn it around and do the same thing, you can see that it's quite thin. It's about as thick as a popsicle stick. And the bees, that actually creates a little start for the bees to start hanging their comb, and they'll draw it out all by themselves. So with foundation, you get a sheet that's already formed hexagons, and the bees draw it out that way, whereas with their naturally drawn comb, they hang it from the top of this starter strip, which is unwaxed. And the bees will draw these kind of reverse rainbow shapes, I don't know, I guess, and then they'll join everything up into this sheet. And the benefit of that is that they can actually draw whatever cell size they like. So bees have got 3 main cell sizes. I pointed this out in a few other videos, but here's a good example of it. These are honey cells, you can see by the sort of teardrop shape, and they've got an angle to them that stops the honey from spilling out. And then down below, we've got these big kind of round drone cells, and they're big to fit the big bodies of the drones as the drones pupate. And then across here, we've got smaller worker size cells. And the bees will put honey in all these cells if they need to. You can see nectar in these top cells here. They're actually worker cells. You can see that they're hexagonal and they don't have an angle. But they won't, the queen will only lay drone eggs in drone cells and worker eggs in worker cells. So the benefit of not using the foundation is that the bees can draw whatever size cells they actually need at the time. And I guess the drawback to that is that you're then stuck with that size cell. So we're stuck with these drone size cells in here. So when the queen doesn't want to lay drones in the wintertime, she can't utilise that space, but the bees will fill it with honey.
Do you ever get rid of old comb that isn't being used?
Yeah, great question. This comb's actually pretty old. You can see it's pretty black and pretty kind of, I don't know, a bit brittle and solid. So this would be a great candidate for cycling out. Because it's fairly empty, there's no brood in it, there's just a bit of nectar, we could actually just shake the bees off it and cut it out with a knife and you know, if it's really old and crappy, you could just burn it in your fire, or you can melt it down and use it for candles and beeswax wraps and things like that. Once you've filtered out all the black stuff, which is called slum gum when it comes out.
Slum gum.
Slum gum, yeah. That's the beekeeping term. But if you've got brood in there and you want to cycle your frames, you can put, say this is a frame with a lot of capped brood in it. You put it out to the edge,
Yeah.
and then wait for that brood to hatch out.
Yeah.
And generally the queen won't come out and lay on the edge, but
Yeah.
in many cases she will. So what you can do is take a flow frame out and making sure that this cover is on, you can pull one flow frame out and put the brood frames you want to cycle out up above your queen excluder, so up here, and then wait for that brood to hatch out. The nurse bees will actually smell the brood and come up and tend to it through the excluder, like this. And then the queen won't be able to come up and relay in it. The bees might start filling with honey, but you can check in a week or so and pull it out and use it, and then replace your flow frame. But you do have to make sure this back cover is on, otherwise there'll be a gap here where the bees can escape, where your flow frame's gone and this is sitting in there. So do you want to keep going through the nest, Bella? So I think we might check the flow frames in a little bit, but we may be able to remove this super for the winter.
Is it better to do that if it's empty?
Yeah, it usually is. It sort of depends on where you are and what's coming in, but having seen this new nectar coming in, it may be prudent to leave it on, but we'll see. What are you seeing on that side?
Lots of capped brood and honey.
Is it a good pattern over there?
Yeah, it's pretty full.
Yeah, same over here. It looks really, really good.
Yeah.
Looks like a really, really tight pattern. It's what you really want to see. So much brood and lots of honey. However, there can be a thing in cold weather climates where if you're seeing this much brood, you know, the population's still expanding and it's getting really cold. The more bees means the more honey they're going to consume over winter. So you really want to make sure, if you're doing an autumn check, that going into winter your bees do have enough food. And that can mean honey in the super, or you're feeding them sugar water over winter. It really depends on your climate and where you are, and it's great to get the knowledge of established beekeepers in your area. So I can also see, like you said before, fairly old larvae in the holes that look empty. So it's really great.
Pete, Wayne was asking his question was, why are the bees shaking? And someone, Samuel I think, has come in and said, oh, it's the waggle dance.
Yeah. So we'll see if we can find one. The waggle dance is the way that the bees communicate inside the hive, so that if you imagine inside it's quite dark, so it's all sort of smell and vibration in there. So the bees have developed this way of communicating whereabouts a nectar source is in the outside world. And apparently, I think this was worked out by a guy named Thomas Seeley, who's an amazing bee researcher in America. Apparently, so up on the comb is this way, because that's the top of the comb. Bella's holding it upside down, but up corresponds to the position of the sun at the time of the dance. And the angle the bee's dancing at in opposition to up is the angle that the forage is relative to the sun, and the amount of distance that they dance for is relative to the amount of distance away that forage is. So it's a really incredible little system, but I can't see one happening. Hopefully we'll find one soon.
Take that off me. I've
Yeah.
got a bee in my sleeve.
Oh no.
Peter, you're always looking for the queen when you're doing an inspection?
Yeah, usually keep an eye out for her. Obviously, if you find eggs, then you know she's been there within the last 3 days, because eggs take 3 days to hatch. And so if you can't see your queen, it doesn't matter. You just really want to get used to seeing eggs and small larvae, and that can tell you a lot about whether she's there or not. And I think we've established that she's here because we haven't been into this hive for quite a while. And we would see no brood. But we'll definitely try and find her. I'll just pull this frame out below. Did you get the bee out?
I think so. We'll find out.
I can see the queen on this frame. I don't know if you want to try and find her. So she's a bit longer and she sort of waddles around. She's up near the top. Just here, yeah. She's a bit of a smaller queen, this one. She's very quick. You can see her putting her heads down the cells, trying to figure out where to lay, perhaps. So what she'll do is she will put her head down a cell and see if it's clean and ready for laying in. And then usually, if we're not kind of messing with her, which we are, then she'll stick her abdomen down. There she goes, putting her head in. Nope, she's decided not to lay. She'll stick her abdomen in the cell, and it can take about 20 to